In the hollow heart of Luna, beneath the radiant skin of the moon, the Emperor's laboratories stirred with forbidden light. The vaults were silent save for the hum of ancient machinery. Engines older than Terra's memory, whispering prayers in the binary tongues of forgotten Mechanicum priests. There, amid coils of gold and glass, the Emperor himself stood unmoving, his gaze fixed upon the cradle of darkness before him. Within that cradle floated a form yet unformed, a seed of perfection shaped not from chance, but from vision. Jeanne forges pulsed around it like cathedral hearts, infusing the growing form with strands of divine code. The essence of will, intellect, and indomitable control. But this one was different from his other sons, for this Primarch was not made to lead by glory or fire. He was made to endure in silence, to bend chaos without succumbing to it, to watch when others slept, and to punish when others faltered. The Emperor spoke no word as he watched the shadow stir. Instead, his thoughts shaped the air itself, threads of psychic gold weaving through the chamber. From fear, strength; from loss, wisdom; from darkness, justice. Around him the Mechanicum adepts dared not breathe. They knew what this meant. Another child of the master of mankind, another weapon in the long war against the infinite night. Yet something in the chamber was different tonight, colder, quieter. The lights flickered. A strange distortion rippled through the warp containment fields, like a whisper pressed against the veil. The Emperor felt it immediately. His gaze, sharper than suns, turned toward the disturbance. Shadows stretched across the forge walls, forming the shape of vast wings, fleeting and insubstantial. The air reeked of ozone and iron. For a heartbeat it seemed as though the newborn essence within the cradle was not merely absorbing the Emperor's design, it was studying him in return. Then the alarm screamed. Warp interference flooded the vault, twisting the sacred geometry of the chamber. The golden light fractured into violet storms. Technopriests fell to their knees, their voices cracking in static prayers. Uncontrolled resonance, breach within containment. One cried before his voice was swallowed by the roar of psychic wind. The Emperor raised his hand. In an instant silence, the storms froze mid-motion, the warp's chaos bound by his will. Yet within the suspended cradle, the child, the unfinished Primarch, opened his eyes. They were grey, ancient, unblinking. Eyes that had seen fear before they had seen life. The Emperor stepped forward. Even he, for the first time in millennia, felt a strange echo. Not resistance, but reflection. This one was born not from purity, but from understanding of corruption. He would not be like the others. The radiant Sanguinius, the noble Guilliman, the furious Angron. This one would embody control, the power to impose order through discipline and dread. But before the Emperor could seal the process, the warp struck again. A surge like a tidal scream tore through reality, and the stasis fields shattered. The cradle erupted in light, black and gold entwined, and the child vanished into the storm. The Emperor's command echoed through the vaults, seal the rift. The adepts obeyed, invoking wards, runes, and machine prayers. The breach collapsed into itself, leaving only silence and a circle of scorched stone. Where the cradle had stood, nothing remained. Only the faint scent of burning oil and the echo of a heartbeat that had already fled beyond time. For the first time since the scattering of his creations, the Emperor did not curse the warp's theft. He simply looked into the void and murmured a single word: fear. He knew now where this sun would grow, not in sunlight but beneath the weight of terror. Not among kings but among criminals and cowards. This one would learn humanity's sickness before he ever tasted its glory. Far from terror, across the void, the warp howled. A fragment of light plunged through the immaterium, wrapped in storms and screaming souls, until it struck the surface of a dying world. It fell through black clouds and poisoned rain, breaking through towers of rust and ruin, until it came to rest in the skeletal remains of a hive spire long forgotten. There, in the shadows of endless night, the infant Primarch lay among the bones of the unworthy. The sky above was a bruise of iron and ash. No one heard him cry. No one saw the light fade from his fall. But something in that darkness stirred, drawn to him. Scavengers, heretics, the lost. They found the child wrapped in the smoke of his descent, his eyes reflecting no fear. When the first of them reached for him, a scream followed. Not of the child, but of the man who touched him, his flesh blistering, his mind crushed by a pressure he could not comprehend. The others fled. Only silence remained, and the child's gaze fixed upon the shadows, where they vanished. Above, the hive trembled. Far below, the forges of the planet whispered of an omen, that something had fallen from the stars, something neither god nor man. In the hidden archives of terror, the Emperor stood again before his assembled lords, their armor gleaming beneath cathedral light. "The last of my sons has been taken," he said softly. "A design lost to the night. He shall rise among fear, and he shall master it." One of the custards dared to ask him, "My lord, what name shall we record for him?" The Emperor's eyes glowed faintly, reflecting the darkness between stars. "He shall be nameless until he earns it, but when he does, the night itself will kneel before him." And thus the vaults fell silent once more, their machines asleep beneath Luna's bones. Across the void on a world without dawn, a legend began, a boy who would grow to become the mind of vengeance, the embodiment of control. A Primarch forged not by light, but by the understanding of all that hides within it. The warp whispered his fate long before he knew his own. It spoke not his name, but the symbol he would one day wear, the shadow that watches, the silence that judges. And in that moment, under the dying skies of a broken world, the child opened his eyes once more. This time there was no innocence, only purpose. The night had found its guardian. The world into which the lost Primarch had fallen was one that had long forgotten the concept of daylight. Its name had been erased by centuries of decay and rebellion, its oceans turned to sludge, its skies to poison. Once it had been a jewel of imperial design, a hive world dedicated to production and discipline. Now it was a graveyard of smoke and steel, a world where justice was a myth, and survival itself a form of cruelty. The sun, if it still existed, was hidden forever behind veils of ash. The child grew in darkness, fed not by love but by necessity. He was taken by the dwellers of the Underhive, the fractured remnants of humanity who scuttled through the rusted skeletons of ancient manufactorums. They called him a curse at first, a shadowborn, for he did not cry when beaten nor tremble when threatened. His eyes gleamed faintly in the dark, reflecting the torchlight like a predator's. He learned their words quickly, but spoke rarely. He listened to everything, the grinding of gears, the whispers of gangs, the prayers of the desperate, and from it all, he began to understand the shape of this world. Violence ruled every corner. Rival clans fought over the scraps of the upper hive's waste, while the surface above was the dominion of corrupt enforcers and decaying nobles who ruled through fear and ritual slaughter. Children starved in the gutters. Men sold their souls to survive a day longer. And somewhere, in the gaps between sanity and despair, the cults of chaos whispered their promises. They grew in the dark like rot beneath the city's skin. The boy saw it all and remembered. He studied the gangs, how they fought, how they lied, how they ruled through terror, and he began to imitate them. But unlike them, his terror had purpose. He did not kill for food or vengeance. He struck those who preyed upon the weak. The first man he killed had been a slaver who dragged screaming children into the forges. The boy appeared without sound, wrapped in the black dust of the tunnels, and when the slaver looked into those cold eyes, he felt something he had not felt in years: fear. When his body was found, hanging from the half-melted girders, none could say who had done it. They began to whisper of a ghost in the Underhive. As the years passed, the ghost became legend. The gangs named him the Night Regent, a name spoken in awe and hatred. He moved unseen, his body shaped by the unnatural resilience of his kind. He could scale the iron towers like a phantom, vanish in smoke, and strike faster than any mortal could see. His skin bore the marks of fire and blade, but his resolve did not waver. He did not age as men did. Time seemed afraid to touch him. He built his own order among the lost, not soldiers but watchers. The broken, the abandoned, the children he had once been among. He taught them silence, patience, discipline. He trained them to see the difference between justice and vengeance, though few ever could. They called themselves the Vigil, and their symbol was a single black wing painted in soot upon their armor scraps. The regent ruled from the shadows, neither tyrant nor savior. He punished corruption where it spread and demanded obedience from those he spared. In time, even the surface lords whispered of him, this faceless ruler beneath the city, whose reach extended into their courts, whose spies walked among their slaves. They feared him, though none had ever seen his face. But the Primarch's nature could not remain hidden forever. His strength grew beyond reason. His mind sharpened into a weapon of calculation and foresight. When he walked the streets, even the mad fell silent. When he fought, his enemies fled before his rage, for he moved like something beyond human. He began to dream of things he could not name. Towers of light, legions of armored giants, a father whose face was obscured by flame. Each dream ended the same, with a golden voice calling his name, a name he had never been given. And yet for all his power, the regent felt the limits of his dominion. No matter how many criminals he struck down, the world itself remained rotted to the core for Kihar. Each dawn, though there were no true dawns here, he would stand upon the highest spire and gaze toward the sky, its darkness eternal. He began to ask the question that haunted him. If fear alone could not save the innocent, then what could? One night, while hunting a chaos sect in the ruins of a pre-imperial chapel, he found a symbol etched into the stone, an eagle of two heads, wings spread wide. Beneath it, carved with trembling hands, were words so ancient they burned his sight, for the Emperor of Mankind. The moment he read them, something inside him stirred, his mind flooded with visions. Soldiers clad in gold, worlds burning beneath banners of light, and a figure at the center of it all, radiant and terrible, holding back the tide of darkness with a single raised hand. He fell to his knees, breathless, as a voice filled his mind. "My son found at last." He rose, trembling. The chapel walls shook as the ground beneath the hive trembled with unknown force. In the void above, the warp twisted, and something vast reached across eternity to touch him. His followers, seeing him illuminated in that unholy light, believed a god had come to claim him. Some knelt, others fled in terror. When the light faded, the regent stood alone in the ruins, his cloak torn, his eyes burning with new purpose. The voice had faded, but the command remained. He turned his gaze toward the heavens, or what passed for them, and whispered into the darkness, "I will find you." Above, for the first time in centuries, a sliver of light broke through the clouds. It was faint, fleeting, but it marked the beginning of something no world had seen since before the age of strife. The dawn had returned, if only for a moment, and in that light the Emperor smiled. The dawn that touched the hive's poisoned clouds was brief, almost hesitant, as though the light itself feared what it had found. When it faded, the world returned to its endless gloom, but something had changed within its heart. The man who had been only myth among the underhive now walked as if burdened with unseen purpose. His eyes no longer scanned for threats, they sought meaning, direction, a pattern in the chaos he had long ruled from the shadows. The words burned into his mind, for the Emperor of Mankind had ignited a storm that would not rest. He began to gather his vigil. From the tunnels and spires they came, loyal only to the legend they had served in whispers. Children he had once saved now stood as warriors, their bodies marked with the Sootwing emblem, their faces hidden by iron masks. They watched him as he spoke for the first time in many years. His voice was calm, but beneath it was a weight of command that none dared defy. "The rot of this world is not its people," he said, "but the gods it serves, the false, the hungry, the whispering ones. We will strike them not with faith, but with order. We will become the night they cannot corrupt." In the months that followed, the underhive changed. The vigil became an army of silence. Chaos shrines burned in the depths of the city. Warp-born priests were dragged from their altars and hung from the spires. The regent's tactics were unlike any the cults had faced, swift, precise, surgical. He struck not at their strongholds, but at their symbols, their leaders, their lies. Fear spread among the corrupted faster than plague. Yet as his legend grew, so too did the unease of those who served him. They had begun as broken souls united by his will, but now they felt that same will turning upon them, cold, exacting, merciless. He demanded discipline beyond human measure, punished hesitation with exile, and executed betrayal without hesitation. He believed that only through control could chaos be defeated, and in his eyes control was an absolute law. Still, the people whispered his name with reverence. In the upper hives, nobles invoked the regent's justice to terrify their rivals. In the lower depths, mothers whispered prayers to him over their sleeping children. He had become both myth and faith, the unseen god of the lost, but he rejected their worship. "I am not your savior," he told his captains. "If I must become a monster to destroy monsters, then so be it. Let none build altars in my name." Each night he returned to the ruined chapel where he had first heard the Emperor's voice. There he meditated motionless for hours, seeking that presence again. Sometimes he felt it, a faint warmth like sunlight through dust. Other times only silence. Yet the memory of that voice sustained him. He began to speak to it in the quiet as one speaks to an unseen father. "My world is dying," he would whisper. You sent me here to learn. I have learned that humanity does not need mercy. It needs structure. Fear guides them better than love. I will give them both, if that is your design. Far across the void, the Emperor heard the echoes of his lost son's thoughts within the currents of the Imperium. He felt the logic, the precision, the devotion tempered by sorrow. Among all his creations, none reflected his own mind so perfectly, and none carried such solitude. The Emperor reached back through the veil, but his voice was faint, blurred by the turbulence of the warp. The connection flickered like a dying flame. The time was not yet right. The time was not yet right. The Regent did not know that he was being prepared, not for salvation, but for revelation. Years passed. His world began to shift. The Vigil became an empire beneath the surface, a hierarchy of silent operatives whose influence reached into the hives above. Trade routes reopened under his protection. The weak found safety in the dark, guarded by unseen sentinels. Even the enforcers of the upper world began to yield, sending emissaries to the Night Regent's domain, offering tribute in exchange for peace. But with power came scrutiny. The Chaos cults, though weakened, were never truly destroyed. They whispered to those he had punished, twisting their resentment into faith. They began to call him the false emperor, claiming that his rule was but another mask of tyranny. Their lies spread through the ranks of the Vigil, subtle and venomous. The first rebellion came from within. One of his oldest lieutenants, a man named Kale, confronted him within the chapel where the Blackwing symbol hung above the altar. "We were meant to bring hope," Kale said, his voice trembling. "But you have become the very thing you swore to fight. You rule through fear, Regent. You demand obedience, not belief." The Regent regarded him for a long time, eyes cold beneath the cowl of shadow. "Hope is a luxury for those who have never faced the void," he replied. "A fear keeps them alive." Kale's hand trembled on his weapon. "Then you are no better than the gods you destroy." The silence that followed was brief. A single motion, a blur in the dim light, and Kale's body fell at the base of the altar. The Regent stood above him, expression unreadable. Around him the Vigil remained silent. None questioned him again. But that night, for the first time in years, he did not sleep. He stood upon the highest spire, gazing toward the black horizon. The words of his fallen brother echoed within him. "No better than the gods you destroy." He clenched his fist, feeling the faint tremor in his veins, the distant pull of something vast and unseen. The warp itself seemed to shudder at his defiance. He knew the path ahead would not end in peace. It would end in revelation or damnation. And as the hive slumbered beneath its endless sky of smoke, the Night Regent whispered into the void once more. "Then let fear be my gift to humanity. Let it save them, even from themselves." Unseen by mortal eyes, the Emperor's gaze fell upon that world again, the faintest glimmer of pride and sorrow within his light. The time was drawing near. The son he had lost was almost ready to be found. The world had fallen into an uneasy order beneath the Regent's reign. The forges burned once more, their smoke billowing through the hive spires like breath through the lungs of a dying god. The people obeyed without question. The gangs were gone, the cults silenced, and the corrupted nobles who once ruled from gilded towers now knelt before the unseen master of the Underhive. Fear had become law, and for the first time in centuries peace reigned, a peace as cold and unyielding as the iron beneath their feet. But the Regent knew it was an illusion. He could feel the cracks within the foundation of his own making. The Vigil had become too large, its ranks filled with men who obeyed but did not understand. The fires of chaos were rekindling in the outskirts, feeding on desperation and faith. The silence he had built began to feel like a coffin. Even victory had become a kind of prison. And still, every night he returned to the ruined chapel, to the ancient carving of the twin-headed eagle, seeking the voice that had once spoken through the warp. Weeks passed, then months. The visions came less frequently, and when they did, they were fragments. A hand reaching through light, a whisper drowned by thunder. He began to wonder if he had imagined it all, if the god he had devoted his will to had never existed. Yet the feeling persisted deep within his chest, that something vast was watching him, waiting. The first sign came without warning. The skies above the hive flared with unnatural brilliance, turning the clouds of ash to molten gold. The storm that followed was not of rain, but of light. Shafts of radiance cutting through the blackened towers, purging the night as though the world itself was being judged. The Vigil scrambled to arms, believing it to be another attack by chaos sorcery. But the Regent stood at the edge of his citadel and watched the heavens open. From within that brilliance a vast shape descended, a craft of impossible design, neither ship nor fortress, glowing with the aura of sanctity. The ground shook as it pierced the atmosphere, leaving trails of fire in its wake. When it landed beyond the hive's perimeter, the air trembled with psychic resonance so profound that even the regent felt it press against his mind. He fell to one knee, breath shallow. The voice that had haunted his dreams returned clear and commanding. "My son." He rose slowly, his hand gripping the edge of the spire. His eyes narrowed as the radiance pulsed again, reshaping the horizon itself. Around him, the vigil murmured prayers of fear and awe. Some called it the arrival of a god, others a retribution. He said nothing. He simply whispered, "He has come." He took only his blade and cloak, leaving behind his army. Alone he walked through the empty streets toward the light beyond the hive gates. The path was long and silent, broken only by the sound of distant thunder. The air grew warm as he neared the landing site, each breath thick with ozone and incense. When he crested the final ridge, he saw them. Figures in armor of living gold, each standing taller than any mortal. Their visors expressionless, their presence radiating both power and serenity. At their center stood a man. Not a man, something greater. Something greater. His armor shimmered with a light that no forge could craft, and his face was both terrible and beautiful, infinite in its calm. The regent knew at once who he was, the presence that had lingered in his dreams, the architect of his very being, the emperor. For the first time in his life, the regent felt uncertainty. He had imagined this moment for years, shaped his empire in preparation for it, but now that it had come, words failed him. He fell to one knee, his head bowed. The silence stretched heavy with eternity. When the emperor spoke, his voice was neither loud nor soft. It simply was, echoing through flesh and thought alike. "Arise, my son." The regent obeyed, his movements cautious. "You are the one who spoke to me," he said quietly. "The one who called me from the dark." The emperor regarded him with eyes that seemed to contain entire stars. "You heard me even across the veil of the warp. You resisted its whispers. Few could have done so. You were never lost, only waiting." Fitchen's gaze was steady, but his voice carried the weight of a lifetime of silence. "I have ruled in your absence. I have brought order to this world. Yet even now, I feel that it is not enough. Humanity rots from within. Fear binds them, but it does not purify them." The emperor stepped closer, and the air shimmered around him. "You have learned the first lesson, but not the last. Fear is the foundation of control, but not its purpose. You have built a kingdom of shadow. I would have you bring that shadow to my light." The words struck him with the force of revelation. The emperor extended his hand. "Come with me, my son. You were made not to rule one world, but to command legions. Your brothers await." The regent hesitated. In that instant, 1,000 thoughts warred within him. Pride, doubt, longing. He looked back toward the hive, its towers black against the fading light. The vigil would fall without him. The order he had built would crumble into chaos once more. But he knew, with the clarity that came only to those who had lived among fear, that his path was not meant to end here. He reached out and took his father's hand. The contact was brief, but it seared through his very essence. The emperor's psychic light enveloped him, lifting him above the ashen plain. The custodians turned in unison, forming a golden phalanx around their lord and his newly found son. As the craft rose once more into the sky, the hive below seemed to bow beneath its glow. The people who saw it fell to their knees, whispering prayers to the figure they had once called the Night Regent. To them, he had ascended, the god of the dark taken by the light. And as the world dwindled beneath him, the regent spoke for the first time in the language of his father's legions. "What name do I bear among your sons?" The emperor's gaze remained fixed upon the stars ahead. "You will know it when they do, my son. The name they will give you is not one of birth, but of legacy." The craft vanished into the upper atmosphere, leaving only silence in its wake. On the dead world below, the fires of rebellion burned once more, and in the void, a new Primarch had been found. The ship that bore the regent from his dying world cut through the void like a blade of gold through ink. Within its sanctified halls, silence reigned, a reverent quiet broken only by the hum of engines and the faint rhythmic pulse of the emperor's presence. The regent moved through its corridors as one haunted by both awe and unease. Every surface gleamed with impossible craftsmanship, every wall inscribed with sigils of protection and purpose. This was not the world of rust and shadow he had known. This was perfection carved from the will of a god. He felt the emperor's gaze often, though his form was distant. There were no words between them for many days. The silence was not cold, it was heavy, laden with understanding that transcended speech. The regent spent those days observing the golden warriors, the custodians, who moved with unerring precision, their every gesture a ritual of devotion. To them, he was an object of reverence and curiosity. One of the lost sons returned, a fragment of their master's design restored. When they finally reached Terra, he beheld the cradle of mankind through the ship's viewing glass. It was not the paradise of myth, but a world of monumental decay and sacred industry. Great cathedrals of iron reached toward a dying sky, and the planet's surface burned with the light of 1 billion forges. Yet beneath the weight of its ruin, he felt the heartbeat of something eternal. The emperor's empire was vast beyond measure, built not upon faith, but upon the certainty of his will. When the regent descended to the surface, he was brought before the assembled Primarchs, his brothers. They stood within the hall of eternity, their presence a tapestry of power, pride, and conflict. Each bore the unmistakable mark of their world, some radiant, some monstrous. He felt their eyes upon him, measuring, judging. Robout Gilliman was the first to step forward, his voice formal, his tone balanced. "Another has returned to us," he said. "The circle grows closer to completion." Horus followed, his smile sharp, his confidence palpable. "And what name shall this one bear, Father? Father? What title shall we give the child of the dark?" The emperor turned his gaze upon his newly found son. "He is not child but architect," he said softly. "He has ruled without guidance, mastered order in the abyss. He shall command the Sext Legion." The hall stirred. The regent bowed his head, his expression unreadable. "What are they, these legions you speak of?" "Your brother's armies," the emperor replied, "each shaped in the image of its master. They are mankind's deliverance, and its chains. Yours await their true purpose." And so it was that the regent was brought before the warriors who bore his blood. They were unlike the vigil he had once commanded. To his brothers he was the dark sun, a being who embodied restraint so absolute it verged on inhuman. The emperor's words had been prophecy, his gift and curse were one. Fear was his doctrine, and through it his sons became instruments of inevitability. He taught them that fear was not chaos. It was control. To master fear was to master the mind itself. On the parade grounds of Kievar, where his legion trained among towering iron cliffs, he spoke to his captains as dusk fell over the horizon. "You will be the reminder," he said, his voice low, his presence commanding even the wind. "But to those who defy order, you will be their judgment. To those who serve faithfully, you will be unseen. The greatest victory is not in the killing, but in the silence that follows it." And his warriors knelt, repeating his words as oath. Around them the light died completely, leaving only shadow, his chosen element. He felt peace in that darkness, as if the void itself had accepted his dominion. Yet peace among the sons of the emperor was a fragile thing. Rumors reached Terra that the Dark Sun's methods bordered on heresy. Some said his legion employed terror not merely as a weapon, but as faith. Others claimed he worshipped no god because he intended to become one. The whispers began among the mortal governors who feared his arrival. But soon, even among the Primarchs, unease grew. Fulgrim, proud and resplendent, once said during council, "His victories are not victories, they are erasures. Where he walks, history ends. How can mankind be inspired by a shadow?" When Guilliman, ever the diplomat, had responded with measured tone. "Inspiration is not his domain. He is the balance to our excesses. The emperor does not err in design," but Horus, whose words could charm even the sternest of their brothers, had smiled faintly. "Perhaps not," he said. "But what happens when the shadow forgets the light that cast it?" The emperor, silent at his throne, offered no answer. The regent ignored the talk. He cared little for the approval of his brothers. They sought glory in conquest. He sought permanence in order. To him, their empires were fragile sculptures of ego. His war was not against flesh, but entropy itself. Still, the emperor's silence lingered in his mind. There was always distance between them. The warmth of that first encounter had faded into the vast, impassive light of command. He served loyally, but each victory seemed only to widen the gulf. When next the emperor summoned him to Terra, it was without ceremony. The golden halls of the palace felt colder than before. The air thrummed with tension. The regent approached the dais where the emperor stood alone, his gaze distant, his form illuminated by the faint shimmer of psychic radiance. "You have done well, my son," the Emperor said, though his tone was unreadable. The regent bowed his head. "The Imperium is stronger, the darkness recedes." "Even now," the Emperor replied. "But tell me, do you believe mankind fears me?" The question struck him like a blade. He hesitated. "They worship you." "Worship," the Emperor said quietly, "is not the same as obedience. They love the light because it spares them from the dark. But they do not understand the dark itself. You do." "I was born in it," the regent answered. "It taught me what they must become to survive. Then you know its price." The words carried a weight beyond comprehension. For a moment, the regent thought he saw fatigue behind the Emperor's gaze, an echo of burden that no god should bear. He wanted to ask what haunted him, what sorrow lay beneath that perfect composure, but he dared not. The Emperor turned away and the conversation ended as abruptly as it had begun. When the regent left Terra, he carried with him a sense of unease that even the void could not silence. The Emperor's eyes had seen something far beyond this moment. Something inevitable and terrible. In the campaigns that followed, the Dark Sun drove his legion harder than ever before. They became specters of war, their armor blackened, their symbols stripped of color. They struck from the void without herald, infiltrated entire worlds before their presence was known, and dismantled rebellions before the enemy had time to name their cause. Planets pacified by the CXTH never rose again, their obedience absolute, their silence eternal, but victory had its cost. The regent began to feel his own methods turning inward, constricting like a noose around his mind. The discipline he demanded left no room for humanity. His sons became reflections of his will, flawless, emotionless, unyielding. In their eyes he saw what he had created, perfect instruments, and nothing more. One night aboard his flagship, the Veiled Truth, he stood before the viewing deck, watching the slow spin of a dying star. The light flickered weakly, its radiance devoured by its own gravity. "Such is the fate of all things," he murmured. "To burn too bright is to invite collapse." In the reflection of the glass, his eyes met those of his second-in-command, Captain Corvin Thane. The warrior stood silent for a moment before speaking. "You taught us to embrace the dark, Father? But can one live within it forever?" The regent turned his gaze back to the void. "One does not live within the dark," he said. "One endures it. And in that stillness, even the stars seemed to tremble." The regent's shadow stretched long across the stars, and with every campaign his name grew heavier among the legions. The Emperor's empire expanded in silence where his forces walked, and though no songs were sung of their victories, their absence was its own legend. Yet where the Dark Sun brought order, his brothers brought rivalry. Each saw in him something they could not define, a reflection of what they feared within themselves. Horus, the War Master, was the first to bridge that distance. He came not as rival, but as brother, his charisma disarming and his words carrying the warmth of kinship the regent had never known. They met aboard the Vengeful Spirit, its halls filled with the scent of burning incense and the murmured chants of oaths renewed. The two stood before a wide viewport, the stars stretching endlessly beyond. "You move like the night itself," Horus said, breaking the silence. "The others speak of you as if you were a myth. Even Gilliman wonders if you bleed." The regent's voice was calm, measured. "We bleed as any man does." "I simply do not waste it." Horus laughed, a sound that filled the chamber with life. Still the philosopher, "Tell me, brother, does the dark comfort you, or does it consume you?" "It does neither," the regent replied. "It reminds me of what we are meant to protect. The light is not eternal. The light is not eternal. Without vigilance it dies." Horus turned toward him, the reflection of distant suns dancing in his armor. "And what of us? Do we not burn too brightly, we sons of a god?" The regent regarded him quietly. "Some of us do." For a long time neither spoke. Yet beneath their exchange lay a current of understanding, the unspoken recognition of two commanders who bore the weight of perfection and the cracks forming beneath it. Horus saw in the regent something he could never be, unyielding, incorruptible, untouched by the need for adoration. And the regent in turn saw in Horus the reflection of temptation, the desire to lead not through fear, but through love. In the months that followed, the regent's legion and Horus's lunar wolves fought side by side in the campaign of Ilium Reach. The war was swift and brutal. Horus led from the front, his fury inspiring his men, while the regent's legion moved like shadows around him, dismantling the enemy before his hammer could fall. Together they achieved what the imperial planners had deemed impossible. the subjugation of an entire sector in under a year. Their victories forged respect but also friction. Horus's captains whispered that the Knight Regent's methods stripped glory from the battlefield. The CXTH did not fight beside them. They erased the enemy before combat could be joined. Horus dismissed their complaints, but a seed had been planted. During one of the final sieges, deep within the manufactorum city of Taldris, the regent entered alone ahead of his men, seeking the heart of the resistance. The air was thick with smoke and the metallic scent of old blood. As he moved through the corridors, something called to him, not through sound but through thought. A whisper, soft as breath and yet vast as the void. You know them all, yet none know you. He froze, hand tightening on his blade. The voice echoed not in the air, but within his mind. You are a creature of fear. You wear it well. But even the night has shadows it cannot cast. He stepped into a great chamber lined with broken statues of forgotten saints. At its center, a figure stood, a man-shaped wound in reality, its body a shifting storm of black flame. A demon, ancient and sentient. You speak boldly for something about to die, the regent said, his voice steady though the warp burned around him. The creature's laughter was a sound without air. A die? I am the echo that birthed your kind. Even your father cannot silence what I am. He fears the dark as much as you rule it. The word struck deeper than he wished to admit. The emperor fears nothing, or does he not? The demon murmured. He fears what he made in you. You are the shadow of his will, the part he cannot face. You are fear itself, born to terrify even the divine. The divine. The regent moved faster than light, his blade cleaving through the creature's form, scattering warp light like embers in a storm. But even as the demon dissolved, its voice lingered. You will see when brother turns upon brother. You will see whose fear endures. When the light faded, he stood alone amid ruin. Yet the echo remained, buried beneath his thoughts. Later, Horus found him atop the citadel's ramparts, silent as always. The War Master's face was shadowed, his tone uncharacteristically low. You've been distant since the siege began. The regent did not look at him. There are truths I am beginning to understand, truths I would rather forget. Horus leaned against the parapet, watching the smoke curl upward. You and I, we both serve a purpose greater than ourselves. But sometimes I wonder if he sees us as sons, or as tools. The regent's gaze shifted, studying him. Would it matter? Horus said, and for the first time his voice wavered. If I were to find that purpose false. False, the regent turned fully then, his presence heavy as the void. But do not seek answers in the dark, brother. It will speak back. It will speak back. Horus smiled faintly, masking unease. You almost sound afraid. The regent's reply was barely above a whisper. I am not afraid for myself. They parted that night as brothers, yet something unseen passed between them, an unspoken premonition neither could name. In the silence of his flagship, the regent knelt once more before the darkness of the void, seeking the stillness that once brought him clarity. But the silence was gone. In its place, he heard the faintest echo of laughter. And though he would never speak of it, from that moment onward the regent began to watch the stars differently, as though waiting for them to blink. Ilium Prime was a world of steel and smog, its surface split between the manufactorums of men and the festering temples of the damned. Once a forge of the Mechanicum, it had fallen to corruption, its priests muttering litanies not to the Omnissiah, but to the crawling gods of the warp. For decades its forges had burned with heretical fire, churning out weapons blessed by demons rather than data spirits. When the Emperor's wrath finally turned toward it, the campaign was entrusted to two of his most trusted sons, Horus and the Dark Regent. From orbit, the planet was a scar upon the void. Lightning crackled across its atmosphere, and the faint hum of the warp was audible even through the ship's hull. The Regent stood upon the bridge of the veiled truth, his gaze fixed upon the storm below. Around him, his captains waited for orders, their armor dimly lit by the cold glow of tactical hololiths. Begin infiltration, he said at last. Strike the forges first. Break their breath before their body. Captain Corvin Thane bowed his head. And Horus's forces. They will see the light, the regent replied. We move through the dark. The orders were given, and within hours dropships cloaked in void light descended unseen into the clouds. The Night Sentinels, as they were now called, emerged into the storm, phantoms in black armor, their movements soundless save for the hum of their respirators. The air was thick with ash and prayer, They advanced through manufactorum cathedrals where the walls bled oil and the machinery whispered. Every corridor was a labyrinth of rust and madness. Hirtek priests knelt before molten icons, chanting the names of demons whose eyes blinked from the metal. The regent moved among them like a living shadow. He struck without sound, his blade slicing through armor, flesh, and faith alike. His legion followed his rhythm, each strike measured, each death a note in a symphony of silence. But as they advanced deeper, the warp grew restless. Machinery twisted, lights flickered, and from the vents crawled things that should not have been. Half human, half engine, their bodies fused with demonic essence. The regent's helm lenses flared as he watched one of the creatures writhe toward him, its voice 1,000 whispers layered as one. "A father of fear," it hissed. "You walk among the dead. Do you not know whose hand shapes you?" He cut it down without reply, but the words stayed. The demon's dying laughter echoed through the halls long after its body had turned to ash. By the time they reached the primary forge, Horus's forces had arrived in orbit. Through Voxlink, his voice carried its familiar mix of warmth and command. "A brother, your shadow has moved quickly. The surface burns already. Tell me, what remains?" "A resistance at the core," the regent answered. "The heart still beats. Then we strike together," Horus replied. "Let them see light and darkness fall as one." The combined assault was a sight few would forget. The lunar wolves descended in thunder and flame, their drop pods striking like meteors, while the night sentinels emerged from the smoke, unseen until they were among the enemy. Together they carved a path toward the planet's core, an ancient reactor that pulsed like the heart of some colossal beast. But the closer they came, the more the regent felt it, the pulse of the warp growing stronger, like a heartbeat answering his own. He sensed eyes upon him, not mortal nor divine, but reflective, as though something in the immaterium mirrored his every thought. When they breached the reactor sanctum, the truth revealed itself. The chamber was vast, its walls covered in sigils of both technology and heresy. At its center hung a figure, massive, winged, wearing a mockery of his own visage. The demon's armor was black as voideless, its cowl torn from shadow, its voice the echo of his own. "I am what you will become," it said, spreading its arms. "The regent of the warp, the warden of fear." The legion faltered. Even Horus, entering the chamber behind him, stopped in astonishment. The regent stepped forward, blade drawn. "You are nothing but reflection," he said. "Each shadow cast by lies." The creature smiled. "Then strike me. But remember, one cannot destroy what he denies." The duel was silent, swift and terrible. Each blow split air and reality alike, sparks of psychic energy flashing like lightning. The demon fought not with brute strength, but with memory, manifesting visions from the regent's past. His lost world, his dead, his failures. At one point he saw himself standing over the bodies of his vigil, their lifeless faces whispering his name in accusation. Still, he endured. Each illusion that broke against his will weakened the creature, until at last his blade pierced its chest. The demon screamed, its form unraveling into darkness. As it died, it whispered the same words the demon on Taldris had spoken. "When brother turns upon brother, you will remember me." The warp storm above the planet broke. The skies cleared, the air stilled, and the forges fell silent. The campaign was over. When the regent emerged from the ruin, his armor scorched and his silence unbroken, Horus awaited him. "You've seen something," the War Master said softly. The regent's voice was low. "The enemy within speaks with my voice." Horus placed a hand upon his shoulder, the gesture almost brotherly. "Then remember this, the difference between us and them is choice. You choose who you are." The regent looked toward the smoldering horizon, until the day choice no longer matters. As they returned to orbit, the world of Ilium Prime burned behind them, cleansed, reclaimed, yet haunted. And though the campaign was declared a triumph, those who had fought there whispered for years afterward that they had seen two shadows upon that world's surface, one cast by man, and one by something far deeper. The fires of Ilium Prime had barely cooled when the first whispers began. Among the legions, rumor moved faster than truth, and in the void between campaigns, soldiers told stories to fill the silence. They spoke of demons wearing the faces of Primarchs, of battles fought in two realities at once, and of the dark sun who had stood before a reflection of himself within the warp. Some said the Emperor himself had tested him there, others that chaos had claimed his soul, and he had wrestled it back through sheer will. The regent did not speak of it. But silence, as he well knew, often spoke louder than confession. The War Master defended him at first. Horus, ever the master of unity, silenced the mutterings among his own men, yet even he began to watch his brother differently, not with suspicion, but with wariness, as one might observe a weapon whose edge was too sharp to touch. In private councils he spoke little, content to let his deeds speak in the stillness that followed. Yet wherever he walked, conversation died. His presence was both reassurance and unease, for those who followed him felt protected by fear, not trust. The other Primarchs began to divide in their judgment. Some, like Gilliman and Dawn, saw in him the perfect servant of order, ruthless, disciplined, incorruptible. Others whispered that such purity could not exist without cost. Fulgrim mocked his restraint as cold vanity, while Pecharabo accused him of hiding arrogance behind philosophy. Lemonruss went further, calling him the Emperor's shadow made flesh, and warned that when a shadow grows too large, it devours the light. The Regent listened to none of them. His purpose was singular, and in his quiet he felt the truth of it. The Emperor had created him not to be loved, but to be necessary. He was the counterweight to chaos, the blade that did not gleam. Yet lately, in the still hours between campaigns, doubt had begun to whisper, not as voice but as reflection. He would look upon his armor, black and featureless, and see movement within the glass, shapes that shouldn't be there, a flicker of eyes behind his own. It began aboard the Veiled Truth, 3 months after Ilium. The ship drifted through the void en route to Terra for reassignment, its halls dimly lit, the crew keeping their distance from their commander's quarters. The Regent sat alone in his meditation chamber, its floor engraved with wards of protection against warp intrusion. Yet as he knelt, something slipped through the cracks of thought, a faint pulse beneath the rhythm of his heartbeat. They do not understand you. He froze. The voice was not external. It came from within, layered and toneless, like his own speech reflected through a mirror. They need not understand, he said aloud. Even your brothers fear you. Even he watches with doubt. The Emperor knows all things. He doubts nothing. He doubts nothing. He doubts you. The voice fell silent, leaving only the echo of its absence. The Regent rose slowly, his breath steady though his mind stirred with unease. The wards glowed faintly on the floor, their light flickering, not from power failure but from interference. The warp had touched even here, in the heart of his sanctum. When the ship reached Terra, he requested immediate audience with the Emperor, a rare break from protocol. The petition was granted. In the golden light of the Imperial Palace, the two met once more, father and son. The Regent knelt before the throne, his armor dulled from years of war, his voice steady but edged with something heavier than fatigue. I have seen the enemy wear my face, he said, and now it speaks within my mind. I seek only clarity. The Emperor regarded him in silence, his form haloed in golden light that made even the marble beneath shimmer like liquid flame. You have seen the truth of the warp, he said at last. It does not tempt you with power as it does others. It tempts you with reflection. It shows you what you already fear. The Regent raised his gaze. Then I fear becoming what I am. A faint smile touched the Emperor's lips, not of amusement but sorrow. All of you were made in fragments of myself. You were not born to be whole. You were born to serve a pattern that even you cannot see. And when the pattern ends, the Emperor's eyes, radiant and ancient, softened. Then you will stand where I cannot. The words lingered like a promise and a curse. The Regent bowed and departed, his mind no clearer but his resolve, hardened Papa's resolve, hardened Vinli Saran. The warp might whisper, his brothers might doubt, but duty remained. He was the knife in the dark, and knives did not question the hand that wielded them. Still, as he returned to his ship, he found Horus waiting at the docking bay. The War Master's expression was unreadable. He summoned me as well, Horus said quietly. We are to prepare for something greater than conquest. The whispers in the warp grow louder. Even the Emperor listens. The Regent studied him. There was weariness in Horus's eyes, a strain beneath the charisma. The warp feeds on fear, he said. Do not let it taste yours. Horus smiled faintly. I would say the same to you, brother. They parted with that uneasy exchange, each carrying the weight of what they would not say. The Regent returned to his command, but the silence aboard his ship felt different now, heavier, as though the void itself watched. His sons obeyed without question, yet even among them he sensed the faint tremor of uncertainty. He stood at the viewport long into the night cycle, the stars burning like dying embers. His reflection stared back, faint, distorted, alive. You cannot destroy what you are. His hand twitched toward his weapon, but he stopped himself. The void beyond did not move, yet he could feel it. That subtle pulse, the rhythm of something vast and waiting. He exhaled slowly, his voice a whisper meant only for the dark. Then I will master it. The reflection did not answer, but it smiled, a bit smiled. The regent's visions grew darker in the nights that followed his return from terror. The reflection that haunted him no longer waited for solitude. It began to follow him even in the waking hours. Fleeting movements caught in the edge of his vision, a whisper beneath command, vox static, a flicker in the glass of his armor's lenses. He had learned long ago that fear was a tool, but now it turned upon its master. Still he buried it deep. The Imperium had no place for hesitation, least of all in one of its Primarchs. The summons came abruptly. Terra's moon, Luna, had fallen into rebellion. What had once been the Emperor's first bastion, the cradle of the Jomforges and the silent custodian sentinels, now burned under the banners of corruption. The Mechanicum sects there had turned, seduced by promises whispered through the warp, their machines birthing monstrosities no loyal forge would dare imagine. The regent was ordered to suppress the rebellion swiftly, to cleanse the forges, and restore order to the Emperor's doorstep. But there were complications. Guilliman and Dawn had already deployed forces in orbit, their fleets forming an iron wall above the moon. They awaited approval from the Emperor himself to strike in unison, but the regent saw delay as weakness. Every passing hour allowed the heresy to spread deeper into the heart of the forges. He had lived too long among rot to mistake hesitation for strategy. He stood upon the bridge of the veiled truth, surrounded by the cold light of tactical projections. "We do not wait," he said. Captain Thane hesitated. "My lord, the Primarchs of the Sieth and Viathith have forbidden action without the War Master's sanction." The regent turned toward him, his gaze cutting through the words like a blade. The Emperor's will is not bound by councils. The order was to end the rebellion. "I will do so." Within an hour, the Night Sentinels descended upon Luna. No fanfare, no signal to their allies. The void burned with their entry. The silence that mocked their war fell upon the moon like an executioner's mask. The surface was chaos, manufactorums twisted into spires of bone and iron, forges screaming as molten metal gave birth to abominations. The air was thick with incense and the stink of decay. The regent led from the front, his cloak tearing through the wind, his blade a black arc of judgment. His warriors moved with precision, purging each sector with surgical cruelty. Beneath the shattered domes of the Primarchial forges, the regent saw the scale of corruption. Servitors fused with demonic essence lined the walls like crucified saints. The forges no longer built engines of war but shrines to the gods of madness. He could feel the warp's breath upon his mind, tempting, mocking. And then he heard it, a voice that was not his own, but carried his cadence perfectly. "You cannot cleanse what was born in darkness." The reflection stepped from the smoke, a phantom shaped from his own silhouette. Its armor gleamed blacker than his, its eyes burning like twin embers. The regent froze, his legion fighting and dying around him, yet for that moment, all the noise of war vanished. He spoke only once. "We have defeated you before." The echo smiled. "You defeated yourself. I am what you left behind when you chose obedience over truth." The regent raised his weapon, but before he could strike, the demon shadow vanished into the fog. Around him, his legion faltered as the warp itself began to shift. Machines screamed as their forms twisted. Gravity failed, dragging bodies upward into the air. He recentered his mind, forcing the psychic storm back through sheer will. The darkness recoiled, but it did not flee. When the fires settled, the manufactorum lay in ruins. The regent's forces had succeeded. Luna was purged, its forges silenced. Yet the victory had come at terrible cost. Hundreds of sentinels were lost to the madness that erupted in the storm's heart. Their armor was found abandoned, their helms empty, their oath still echoing through the vox. Above the burning moon, the fleets of Guilliman and Dawn descended. The transmissions came sharp and accusing. "You defied command," Guilliman's voice thundered through the calms. "Your recklessness nearly destroyed the Emperor's own forges." The regent stood unmoved upon the ash plains, the wind tearing at his cloak. "I ended the corruption," he replied. "You would have debated while the rot consumed the foundations of the Imperium." Rogel Dawn's voice followed, colder still. "Nano, you speak as though you are the Emperor's will. You forget that he has chosen a war master. You are not him." "I serve the Emperor. the regent said, and not the shadow of his authority. The channel went dead. The aftermath was swift and merciless. By decree of the High Lords under the Emperor's command, the regent was recalled to Terra to answer for his defiance. He did not resist. His legion, disciplined to the end, withdrew from Luna in perfect silence. The moon burned behind them, a sphere of fire reflecting across the void like a dying eye. When he entered the Hall of Judgment, the air was heavy with incense and accusation. Guilliman stood to the right, Dawn beside him, both statues of duty and restraint. The center beneath the towering light of the imperial dais stood the Emperor. He did not speak as the regent knelt. "You defied my command," the Emperor said finally, his voice echoing like thunder within the marrow of every man present. "I acted before chaos could," the regent answered. "A delay would have cost the Imperium far more than disobedience." The Emperor's gaze pierced him, not with anger, but sorrow. "You see only corruption, not the faith that survives within it. You would rule through fear alone, and in doing so, you forget that even fear must serve hope." The regent's jaw tightened. Hope does not save worlds. It blinds them until the fire takes hold. Silence fell. The Emperor looked upon his son, the one he had crafted to bear the burden of control, and in his eyes for the briefest moment there was something almost human, disappointment. "You have done what I made you to do," he said at last, "and that is why I cannot unmake you. But your war is not over. You will remain apart until you remember what purpose fear must serve." The regent bowed his head. "Then I will remain apart." When he rose and turned away, the hall seemed darker for his passing. Outside, Terra's light struck his armor, glinting once before fading entirely. And high above, the moon he had saved still burned, its surface cracked and smoldering, a wound that would never heal, and a warning written across the heavens. The echoes of Luna's ruin lingered across the Imperium like the tolling of a distant funeral bell. What was meant to be a symbol of purity and discipline now hung wounded in the void. Its forges silenced, its surface scarred by the fire of loyal hands. The Emperor had withdrawn into silence, leaving his sons to interpret his will. Yet among them one name was spoken with growing unease, the Dark Regent, the Primarch of Fear. The judgment was convened within the deepest halls of the Imperial Palace, a place older than any living man, built from the bones of old Earth itself. The walls were lined with custodians and silent scribes who bore witness to every word. The air shimmered faintly with psychic restraint fields, ensuring that no Primarch's wrath could mar the sanctity of the chamber. The regent entered without escort, his armor polished but unadorned. His face uncovered was carved from stone, unreadable, unmoved. Guilliman, Dawn, and Russ stood as the triad of prosecution, their loyalty unquestioned but their tone divided between anger and sorrow. The others watched in silence, Fulgrim smirking faintly from the shadows, Sanguinius grave and still, Magnus studying his brother as though he could see the shape of his thoughts. Guilliman spoke first. "Your actions upon Luna saved it from damnation, yet they nearly damned the Imperium in turn. You disobeyed direct command. You endangered our father's design." The regent's voice was calm, its even tone carrying farther than any shout could have. "The design is meaningless if rot devours its foundations. I acted as I was made to act, to preserve order at any cost." Dawn's jaw tightened. "Order does not come from disobedience. You presume to know his will better than we." "His will was not to wait while corruption spread," the regent replied. "It was to protect humanity. If fear was the weapon required, then I used it." Lemon Russ slammed a fist upon the dais, his growl echoing through the chamber. "You think yourself above us, sitting in your shadows, judging men like a god. You forget that we are all bound by his law." The regent turned his gaze upon him, not with defiance, but with the quiet, cutting weight of truth. A law is only as strong as the fear of breaking it. The chamber fell into uneasy silence. Even the custodians shifted, their golden visors flickering with reflected light. It was Magnus who finally broke the quiet. He speaks not in rebellion, but in conviction. Perhaps what he fears most is what we all do, that the line between order and tyranny grows thinner each day. Sanguinius nodded faintly, his voice soft but resolute. Yet conviction can be as dangerous as corruption. The regent's intent was pure, but purity can burn as fiercely as sin. Then the Emperor entered. No herald announced him. The air simply shifted. Light folded inward, and the chamber was bathed in gold. Every Primarch knelt as one, save the regent, who bowed but did not fall. The emperor regarded him with an expression that no mortal could name, a fusion of sorrow, pride, and inevitability. "Raise, my son," the emperor said. The regent obeyed. His voice was low, almost reverent. "If I am to stand judgment, then I will stand. But I ask only that you judge me for what I have done, not for what others fear I may become." The emperor descended the dais, his steps soundless. "You have done what you were created to do. You brought order where chaos had festered. But you have done so without faith. You see humanity as a machine to be tuned, not a flame to be nurtured. You would rather have a world obedient and lifeless than one flawed but living." The regent's hands tightened at his sides. "A living world falls faster. I have seen it. I have lived it. Fear endures where love dies, and yet the emperor said softly, 'You are proof that even fear cannot exist without purpose. You have turned it into a creed. That is your strength, and your danger.'" The words struck like judgment and mercy entwined. The emperor turned to the council. "He is guilty of disobedience, but not of betrayal. His punishment will not be exile, but reflection." He looked back to his son. "You will not lead the legions for a time. You will remain upon Terra, within my sight. Learn what it is to rule not by fear alone, but by understanding." The regent bowed his head, his expression unreadable. "As you command, father." The emperor's voice grew softer, but every syllable carried the weight of stars. "Remember this, my son. The greatest enemy of fear is not courage. It is compassion. It is compassion." As the emperor withdrew, the Primarchs parted to let their brother pass. None spoke to him as he left. Guilliman's gaze held restrained pity, Russ's simmering distrust. Magnus watched him longest, his psychic sight tracing the currents that clung to the regent like smoke. Outside, the palace was silent. The night hung heavy over Terra, the air thick with dust and gold light from the upper spires. The regent stood upon a balcony overlooking the endless city, his armor reflecting the faint glimmer of stars. He thought of his legion, disciplined, waiting, and leaderless. He thought of Luna, still smoldering in the void, and he thought of the reflection that still lingered in his mind, whispering with a voice like his own. "You are the shadow they will need when their light fails." He closed his eyes, the wind cold against his face. "Then let them fear the dark," he murmured, "until the light returns." In the distance, unseen and unheard, the warp shifted, faintly, almost in approval. Terra's nights were unlike any other, heavy with incense and electric haze, the air thick with the breath of billions who lived and died beneath the golden shadow of the palace. The regent walked those nights as a ghost in plain sight, unseen even when watched. His punishment had left him restless, stripped of command but not of purpose. His legion fought on without him, led by captains who obeyed in silence. Yet for all his restraint, for all his meditation and study beneath the emperor's watchful light, the whispers within him had not ceased. They had grown louder. The emperor had set him to assist in a project buried beneath the imperial palace. The construction of the Webway Gate, the emperor's great and secret design to free mankind from the reach of the warp. It was a labyrinth of impossible geometry, a place where time and reason faltered, hidden behind psychic wards that only gods could pierce. Few of the Primarchs knew of it. Fewer still were permitted to walk its depths. But the emperor had chosen him for this task, not as a warrior, but as a sentinel. It was said the project was nearing completion, but something within it stirred wrong. The Mechanicum adepts who toiled within the labyrinth spoke of strange lights and voices beneath the conduits, of runes that shifted when unwatched, of machines that prayed in their sleep. When he descended into the webway for the first time, the regent understood why. It was like walking into the veins of the universe itself. Corridors of crystalline glass stretched into infinity, filled with the hum of power older than the stars. Every step echoed through eternity. He could feel the emperor's will woven into every wall, every flicker of light. Yet beneath that perfection he sensed decay, the faint pulsing rhythm of something other pressing against the veil. He stood before the primary gate, a vast structure of gold and obsidian, its surface alive with shifting glyphs. Custodians stood guard, motionless and radiant. But their presence did not still the unease. The regent knelt, placing a gauntleted hand upon the floor. The hum of the webway vibrated through him, alien and immense. "You do not belong here," the whisper came, though no mouth spoke it. He rose slowly, eyes narrowing. The reflection again, the voice that haunted his silence. "Show yourself," he said. The light dimmed, shadows bent where none should have been. From the shimmering walls stepped the same dark figure that had mocked him on Ilium Prime. his own face carved from shadow, its edges rippling like smoke. "I am already shown," it said. "I am what was left behind when he took your fear and shaped it into purpose. I am your truth. I am your truth." The regent's voice was steady, but the faintest tremor bled through. "You are an echo of the warp. You have no truth." The figure tilted its head. "Then why does he keep you here in his labyrinth of secrets? Why does he trust you to guard what he fears?" He said nothing, but the question cut deeper than any blade. The demon shadow smiled. "He builds a path to escape the warp, yet binds his empire with it. He hides his truth even from his sons. You have seen it. The deception, the contradictions. You serve order, but he serves ambition. You are not his weapon, dark son. You are his warning." The regent struck, his blade flashing in the dim light, cleaving through the apparition's chest. The figure scattered like dust, yet even as it faded, its laughter filled the air, echoing endlessly through the corridors. When the sound finally died, the webway trembled. Runes flared red. Warnings screamed through the chamber as containment fields fractured. The walls themselves seemed to twist and pulse as the veil tore open, and from the breach, the warp poured in. Demons spilled forth in an unholy tide, shrieking and writhing, their bodies merging with the walls of the gate. Custodians fell upon them instantly, their guardian spears glowing with burning light. The regent waded into the fray beside them, his every motion a calculated act of destruction. His blade sang through flesh and ether alike, cleaving through horrors born of thought and nightmare. But for every demon slain, 2 more crawled from the rift. The psychic pressure was unbearable, the air itself screamed. He could feel the warp tearing at his mind, whispering his name, calling him by the titles it had invented: Father of Fear, Warden of Shadow, the one who watches. He roared against it, his voice cutting through the madness. "You will not take this." A blast of psychic force erupted from him, pure and sharp, born not of faith but of will. The shockwave obliterated everything within reach, sealing the nearest demons back into the rift. The custodians staggered but did not falter. Together they reactivated the containment sigils, forcing the warp back inch by inch. When at last the breach closed, the webway fell silent once more. He stood amidst the wreckage, his armor scorched, his breathing slow and even. The custodians saluted him, their faces unreadable behind their helms. But within that silence he heard the faintest echo, laughter fading into the dark. Later, in the Emperor's private sanctum, he stood before his father once more. The Emperor's presence filled the chamber like sunlight made flesh. "You have seen the truth," the Emperor said quietly. "The webway is not yet pure. It resists my design. I cannot hold it alone." The regent bowed his head. "Then let me remain there. I will keep it sealed until it obeys you." The Emperor's gaze lingered upon him. "You would imprison yourself within the shadow you were made to master? If that is my purpose, then yes." There was no answer for a long moment. Then the Emperor said, "Very well, but understand, my son, every prison changes its warden." The regent did not reply. He turned, the faint glow of the sanctum reflecting in his eyes. For a fleeting instant, the Emperor thought he saw something move behind him, a shadow that did not follow the light. And as the regent descended once more into the depths, the webway stirred. Its gates pulsed faintly, like the heart of a sleeping god, and in its rhythm echoed a single truth. The war was far from over. It had only just begun, and the line between warden and prisoner was already fading. The regent did not return to the surface again. For years, perhaps decades, time lost all meaning within the labyrinth. He walked the corridors of the Emperor's webway, keeping his silent watch. The demonic incursions had lessened since the breach, but never ceased entirely. The warp pressed endlessly against the walls, whispering through the cracks, clawing at the edges of reality like a beast starving for a soul to devour. He slept rarely, if at all. His every moment was vigilance. He had become the warden in truth. The golden wards that lined the tunnels pulsed faintly beneath his hand as he passed, recognizing the signature of his mind. The custodians who had once guarded the depths were long withdrawn by the Emperor. Only he remained by his own will. It was not command but choice, an exile chosen for necessity. Above, the Imperium prospered, or so the messages claimed. The Emperor's great design continued. And yet in the deep quiet of that place, the regent felt something shifting, a shadow growing far beyond the webway's reach. The whispers had changed, no longer taunts but invitations. Brother turns upon brother, The phrase followed him through the echoing tunnels like a mantra. At first he dismissed it as the lingering voice of the demon that had haunted him since Ilium Prime. But the tone had evolved, become clearer, almost familiar. Sometimes it spoke with Horus's voice. He tried to shut it out, to drown it in duty. But the visions grew stronger. He saw glimpses in the reflections of the crystal walls, worlds burning, ships wreathed in flame, the Emperor's light faltering. He saw his brothers, magnificent, terrible, turning their blades against one another. Ooh! And always in the heart of those visions, Horus stood crowned in ruin, his eyes burning with betrayal. When at last the message came through the Imperial channels, the Regent was already waiting for it. The webway trembled that day, the air itself carrying the faint resonance of the warp's triumph. The custodians above sent word. The War Master had turned. Horus Lupercal, the Emperor's favored son, had declared war upon his father. The great betrayal had begun. The Regent stood in silence for a long time before the transmission ended. He felt no surprise, only inevitability. He had seen it reflected in Horus's gaze years ago, in the unspoken doubt that had lingered beneath every word. The galaxy had always been one breath away from collapse. It was only fitting that the brightest among them would be the one to shatter it. The custodians begged him to remain. The webway's gates still required protection. The Emperor's work could not be risked. But the Regent had made his choice long before they spoke. The webway is a cage, he told them. It holds back the storm, but now the storm is everywhere. He departed the labyrinth without ceremony, ascending through the hollow heart of terror until the sunlight struck his armor once more. The planet was a fortress now, its skies filled with ships, its streets crowded with soldiers and pilgrims. Fear walked every corridor. The people whispered of the coming war as if it were judgment itself. When the Regent entered the palace, no herald announced him. He walked past the golden statues and marble saints until he reached the Sanctum Imperialis, where the Emperor waited him upon the dais of light. The chamber burned with psychic fire. The air trembled beneath the weight of his presence. "You have seen what has come," the Emperor said without turning. His voice was both thunder and grief. "I have," the Regent replied. "It was always coming." The Emperor's gaze met his at last. "You would leave the webway unguarded? How the webway will endure for now. But humanity will not if I stay beneath the earth." The Emperor regarded him for a long, still moment. "You would fight beside your brothers who once condemned you. Oh, who once condemned you. I would fight for you," he said quietly. "For what remains worth fearing?" There was no approval, no denial, only silence. And in that silence the Regent understood. The Emperor could no longer leave his throne. His great work demanded his presence, his very life force. Terror would be defended by mortals, demigods, and whatever faith could be salvaged from despair. The Regent bowed once, not as a soldier but as a son. "Then I will keep vigil in your name until the end." When he departed the throne room, none stopped him. His armor, long unmarked, now bore a single sigil upon its chest, an inverted aquila, wings folded inward, carved in pale gold. The symbol of silent devotion. The journey to the front was swift. His legion, his sons, his shadows, had not forgotten him. When his fleet emerged from the warp, they came in formation as if awaiting their father's command all along. The transmission crackled across the void, thousands of voices speaking in unison. "We stand ready, Father." And the Regent, watching the distant fires of Horus's uprising consume entire systems, answered only, "Then let us remind them what it means to fear." The war that followed was one of whispers and smoke. Where the traitors spread chaos, the night sentinels brought silence. They struck not at fleets, but at the hearts of rebellion, the traitor governors, the psychers, the warp cults that fed the heresy from within. They fought unseen, their blades never raised in glory. Whole worlds fell back into imperial control without a single battle. To the loyalists they were ghosts. To the traitors they were nightmares. But the Regent knew the truth. Every victory was borrowed time. Every act of justice a ripple against an ocean of madness. Horus's shadow loomed ever closer to terror, and the Emperor's light grew thin. When at last the signal came, the War Master's fleet breaking into the Sol system, the Regent gathered his captains aboard the Veiled Truth. The air was thick with ozone and reverence. His voice was steady as ever, but its tone carried something deeper, finality. "Brothers," he said, "we were born to guard mankind from the things it cannot face. Now we face the end of all such things. Hold nothing back. If we fall, let it be in silence, so that others may still hear hope. The fleet turned toward Terra, its hull reflecting the dying light of the stars. And as the first distant thunder of the siege began to echo across the void, the Regent stood alone at the prow, his gaze fixed upon the planet that had birthed him, his purpose burning as cold and steady as the void itself. The vigil had ended. The final one had begun. The final one had begun. The siege of Terra began not with the sound of war, but with the silence before it, the stillness of inevitability. The void above the throne world glowed with fire and ruin. Horus's armada darkened the stars, its engines burning with the defiance of gods. The traitor fleets descended like falling constellations, and the loyalist defenses fled to meet them. The Emperor's sons, those who remained true, gathered their legions across the scorched plains and citadels of humanity's first world. And among them the Dark Regent returned, cloaked not in honor, but in shadow. His fleet broke through the perimeter silently, emerging from the dark side of Luna, where the scars of his defiance still burned faintly. He had not asked permission to return. None dared to deny him. The night sentinels dispersed across the planet like ink poured over parchment, infiltrating the ruins of ancient cathedrals, broken spires, and the labyrinthine depths beneath the palace. They would not fight beside the others. Their war would be fought in the unseen places, the corridors between battles, the silence between screams. The Regent himself did not stand among the council of Primarchs when dawn presented the defenses to Rogel, Guilliman, and Sanguinius. He remained beneath, within the palace catacombs, where the air still carried the faint scent of incense and decay. His task was unspoken but known, to guard what others could not see. When the bombardment began, it was as though the heavens themselves had turned traitor. Orbital fire rained upon the planet in waves, shattering continents and boiling oceans. The sky was a wound of flame. Even through the reinforced walls of the imperial palace, the earth trembled with the force of it. For weeks, the night sentinels fought unseen, intercepting assassins, silencing infiltrators, and destroying supply lines before they could reach the traitor vanguard. They were ghosts in the firestorm, unseen even by their allies. Yet each victory came at a cost. The Legion was stretched thin, their numbers dwindling under the relentless tide, and the Regent knew the truth that none dared speak. There would be no victory here, only delay, only sacrifice. He received word of Sanguinius's last stand at the Eternity Gate from a dying Vox channel, the message broken and fading. The angel has fallen. The War Master advances. The words settled into him like stone. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he turned to his captains, their armor blackened with soot and blood. "The palace will fall," he said. "We will not stop it, but we can decide how long it takes." Captain Thane stepped forward. "We fight until the last, my lord." The Regent nodded once. "Then you already know what must be done." They moved deeper into the tunnels, toward the webway's sealed gate, the Emperor's greatest secret, the heart of his plan. The warp pulsed faintly beyond its walls, alive and hungry. It had waited years for this moment. Now, with the Emperor drawn to the surface, it would not wait much longer. The Regent stood before the gate once more, as he had years ago, his armor scarred and his blade dulled with the blood of 100 battles. The whispers came again, louder now, free of restraint. "You cannot hold it. You cannot deny what you are." He closed his eyes, his hand resting against the surface of the gate. "I am what he made me to be," the voice laughed, his own reflected and warped. Then he made his greatest fear. "You were not born to guard the dark, you were born to become it." The gate shuddered. Cracks of light split its surface, tendrils of raw warp energy seeping through, the air filled with screams, the voices of those long dead, of those not yet born. His legion formed a defensive ring around him, firing into the unseen as the walls began to bleed. "Hold," the Regent commanded, though his voice was calm. "Hold the line." The warp surged again, and through it stepped figures that should not exist, twisted mockeries of the night sentinels, their armor warped, their faces reflections of those who fought them. For every loyal warrior that fell, another shadow rose from their corpse, joining the demonic host. The Regent waded into the chaos, his blade a blur of motion, each strike an act of defiance. His sons followed without hesitation, though they knew it was futile. The chamber became a cathedral of slaughter. Blood and shadow intertwined. The warp screamed through the cracks, its light blinding. He felt it then, a presence unlike the others, vast and terrible. A figure forming in the rift, armored in black and gold. crowned in light that burned like a dying sun. Horus, not the man he had known, but something greater, something corrupted beyond recognition. The regent's heart froze as the War Master's gaze found him, even across the breach between worlds. "You should have stood beside me," the voice thundered in his mind. "You of all of them understood what he truly is. I understood enough." The regent answered aloud, his voice breaking the air itself. "I understood that the darkness does not free us, it consumes." The laughter that followed was like the collapse of a star. Then the vision faded, leaving only the howling rift. The regent turned to his captains. "Seal the gate." "My lord, we cannot." "You can," he said, his tone final. "I will hold it." They hesitated, then obeyed. The sigils began to burn, the golden locks reactivating one by one. The warp fought back, each closing rune detonating in psychic flame. The regent stood at the center of it all, unmoving, his armor melting under the strain, his eyes fixed on the widening rift. When the final lock was ready, he turned once more to his legion. "Go," he said softly. "You have done your duty. Now let me do mine." Thane bowed his head, his voice breaking. "We will not forget." The regent almost smiled. "You were never meant to remember me, only what I stood for." As they withdrew, he plunged his blade into the floor, channeling every last ounce of his will through it. The webway screamed, the warp recoiled, and the chamber erupted in white fire. The gates sealed. The noise stopped. When the light faded, only silence remained. Far above, as the Emperor and Horus met in their final battle, a single tremor shuddered through the foundations of the palace. Those who felt it did not understand what it meant, only that, for a fleeting instant, the darkness had gone still. And in that stillness, unseen by gods or men, the regent stood alone in the sealed chamber, his body broken, his eyes closed. His last breath left him as a whisper, "Let the night guard the dawn." Then the light went out. When the siege ended, terror was no longer a world, it was a grave. The skies above the throne world hung black and silent, choked by the ash of the countless dead. The fires that had consumed continents were now smoldering embers, their glow dim against the pallid gold of the imperial palace. The war had been won, if such a word could still hold meaning, but its victory came with the death of gods. The emperor was entombed upon his throne, neither living nor dead. Horus lay destroyed, his body and soul obliterated by the father he had betrayed. The surviving Primarchs, broken and hollow, gathered among the ruins, each one bearing the weight of a galaxy shattered beyond repair. Yet when they counted their brothers, one name was not spoken, for no one dared. The Dark Regent had vanished. None had seen him since the final days of the siege. Some said he fell in the defense of the webway, consumed by the fires he had sworn to contain. Others whispered that he still lived imprisoned within the labyrinth, watching from behind the walls of reality itself. The Emperor had spoken nothing of him. His silence was judgment enough. Years passed, then decades, then centuries. The Imperium endured as all things built on fear and faith do. The legends of the Night Sentinels became ghost stories whispered in the halls of the Inquisition and the Ordo Historia Obscura. They spoke of a shadow that moved where the light faltered, a sentinel that hunted traitors in their sleep, that appeared on worlds about to fall to chaos and vanished before dawn. In the archives of the Adeptus Terra, there existed a single sealed record, unmarked, unreferenced, locked behind 13 layers of encryption. Its content, when finally breached by an inquisitor of exceptional authority, contained only a few words. The Xth Primarch is not dead. His vigil continues, and indeed, far from the gaze of humanity, in the forgotten vaults beneath the broken palace, something stirred. The webway's gates, once sealed, pulsed faintly again with light. Within that timeless space, the air shimmered as though memory itself were breathing. At the center stood a figure still as stone, his armor fused with the obsidian walls. Centuries had passed, yet his form remained unchanged. The Dark Regent, the Primarch of Fear. He no longer felt hunger nor exhaustion. The passage of years had become meaningless. He had become one with the labyrinth, his mind scattered across the infinite pathways of the webway. He felt its tremors when demons clawed at its edges, sensed its pain when the warp howled beyond its borders. He was not alive as mortals understood it, yet neither was he dead. He was purpose incarnate, vigilance given form. Sometimes in the unending quiet, he remembered the faces of his brothers. Horus's smile before it curdled into rebellion. Sanguinius's wings, still bright in memory though they had long been torn and bloodied. Gilliman's reason, Dawn's duty, Magnus's tragedy. He remembered the Emperor's eyes most of all, eyes that had seen eternity and still chosen to hope. But he also remembered the shadow, the reflection that had haunted him since the beginning. It spoke less now, but it was never gone. It had grown quieter, subtler, its voice indistinguishable from his own thoughts. "You see it now, don't you?" it would whisper. "The Imperium endures because of fear. Your father's dream lives only through your doctrine." He never answered it. There was no need. The centuries passed like seconds. The Imperium above changed, splintered, decayed, and rose again, its wars endless and its faith unyielding. Empires rose upon the bones of saints, and heresies were born from the prayers of the faithful. The Dark Regent felt it all, the ebb and flow of human despair, the pulse of the warp that refused to die. The galaxy had become a reflection of himself, broken, eternal, and unrelenting. Once long ago he had believed fear to be a weapon. Now he understood it as a covenant, a binding truth that kept mankind alive when all else had failed. For in the absence of light, fear remained. It compelled them to fight, to pray, to endure. It was the shadow of faith, and faith could not exist without it. And so he watched. When warp storms threatened to breach reality, he was there, unseen, mending the cracks. When heresy took root within the highest ranks, inquisitors reported strange deaths and whispered voices in the dark. Some believed it to be the Emperor's wrath, others the hand of a forgotten guardian. Those who saw him and lived described only a silhouette, a towering figure in black armor, its eyes glowing faintly gray like dying stars. They called him the Eternal Watcher. In time, even the Adeptus Mechanicus came to revere his myth. They claimed he haunted the new sphere, his presence flickering in their data archives whenever corruption spread. To the ecclesiarchy he became both heresy and miracle, proof that even among the Emperor's forsaken, redemption endured. To the Ordo Malleus he was a weapon unseen, striking from the edges of the immaterium where no mortal dared tread. Yet none knew his thoughts, none knew the weight he carried. Deep within the webway, as he walked the endless corridors between realities, he often paused before the sealed gate, the same one he had bled to protect. Its surface still pulsed faintly, alive with the same golden light that had once belonged to his father. He knelt before it as he had done in the beginning. The air shimmered faintly, and for an instant he heard a voice. Not the whisper of the shadow, but something older, familiar. "My son, the vigil is eternal." He bowed his head. "Then I will keep it." The light faded, and the silence returned. Far above, across the stars, 1,000 worlds trembled under the weight of chaos and faith alike. Yet in their darkest hours, when the night seemed endless, some swore they felt a presence, unseen, unspoken, standing watch. A shadow cast by the Emperor's own light, waiting, guarding, never sleeping. The galaxy moved on uncaring. But in the endless dark between stars, a single vow still endured. Fear will keep them safe until the dawn returns.